People say new technologies changed the style of editing. But in the end, I want to think technology are only instruments to get somewhere.
First, editors used to edit just by hand, and they would roll the film down, and they knew that if you had a kiss, you needed this much footage, you know, like a tailor. They sort of knew 9 feet would be good for a kiss, or for a quick action shot, maybe 1 foot. So they just literally measured stuff out like that.
Perhaps the most fascinating piece of equipment in the cutting room is the moviola, which enables the editor to synchronize the film action and sound effects.
And then in Europe, they started to use flatbeds. They used to use Steenbecks and chems. But what then happened was that the chem and the flatbeds started to move over here to America in television.
So we had this flatbed editing machine now, what we call a flatbed, just because the film is running horizontally this way. On the moviola, it ran this way. Yeah. Now it doesn't run at all.
Once Francis and I got together, which was right after I quit my master's program and went to work for him, he went and bought a Steenbeck. And it was that point it occurred to me that I really wanted to develop a total electronic system that would cut without having to go through all the mechanics that we were using on chems and Steenbecks. And a computer is really designed to keep track of stuff, which is primarily half of editing, is just to know where your material is. And so I figured, well, if you had a computer to help you and you could sort of list things and you could call it up very fast, it would make a huge difference. We started using computers in a very rudimentary way on Star Wars.
R2-D2, you know better than to trust a strange computer.
Then I knew when I was going to Empire Strikes Back, I was going to have to use even more of them. So I started a computer division to just explore the ideas of how we could use computers in the filmmaking process, both in terms of computer graphics, in terms of sound, and in terms of editing.
You know, it's kind of a footnote in film history that I edited the first non-linear feature film, a Sidney Lumet film called Power. This was 1985, just when 2 new technologies, different and yet the same, were developing. One was the system that I ended up using, the montage, and George Lucas had a system called Editoroid.
It cost a lot of money, actually, to build the Editoroid, the first one. I mean, it cost like $10 million. And it took like 3 or 4 years. You know, nobody was investing in this sort of thing at that time. There were a few other companies trying, but they were trying to do it as a business model. I was trying to do it primarily because I wanted to build a better editing system as an editor.
The approach that had been taken to a montage was not from a film editor's point of view. So an engineer came out to East Hampton, stayed in the next room, and anytime we had a problem, he would come running in, fix it.
I said, I definitely do not want to have a system out there that is run by an engineer, where the editor sits behind the engineer and gives them the numbers and everything, and then the director sits behind that.
The way montage accomplished the nonlinear editing was that we had 17 copies of the same material on beta decks. You would instruct the system through digital single frames to play from this frame to this frame, and then this frame to this frame, this cut to this cut, and you would build a sequence. And you would say, play the entire sequence from here to here, and it would line up. You would hear in the background.
I said, I want to have a system that is what we learn to be editing, which is a very hands-on, very intuitive, very obvious way of working. And if you want to cut off a frame, you cut off a frame. If you want to add 3 frames, you add 3 frames. If you want to slip sync, you slip sync. You don't have to sort of figure out the numbers and subtract and move it and then lay it down, and once it's laid down, you can't change it. I said it had to be infinitely malleable.
On the rare occasion, a montage would misplay a shot. So you'd have to go back and then play the sequence again to watch it. On the even rarer occasion, it would misplay a shot and it would be a better edit than what I had done. And then we desperately tried to recreate what accidentally had happened.
I think we do need a better interface than what we've got now, much more like the Editoroid had, which is just intuitive and it's all visual. It's just like editing. It's like having a sync machine where you go through and you can see where you need to make your cut. So your hand and your mind, your intellect and your motor skills are completely going in different directions.
I joke with some friends about Tom Cruise in Minority Report, where he was sort of grabbing things off a screen with his hands and moving things around. To me, actually, that seems more like film editing than nonlinear, because it's more, you know, grabbing and moving things, pieces.
I learned a lot about being on the leading edge, you know, the bleeding edge, or being ahead of your time.
There's a lot of interplay and an interchange between technology and art that lead to, in fact, a very creative association on both sides. In some cases, technology issuing from art. in others, a lot of great art, totally supported by technology.
Does digital editing, nonlinear editing, change the art? Absolutely. Throughout history, technology has impacted the art, and you adapt to it. Will films be different because of it? No doubt. I think we're seeing it. Clearly, faster editing is currently the rage. There's more experimentation. Part of the element of that is because of the tools.
We are in a digital age. The computer is like a mirror of the mind. Certainly, the digital age has shaped our perception of things in a broader sense. But in the end, as an editor, you just don't care about that. A film is just a film. If the editing is very visible and fast-paced, it's there because it makes you feel something. It takes you by the hand and makes you run with a character.
The digital revolution had a very concrete effect on films. One of the things you began to see was much faster cutting, more shots being used, first of all, and a greater kind of just freedom with just throwing more shots at the audience. Filmmakers and editors began to take more liberties because they could. And so the technology actually created a change in cinema.
The other shift, of course, is the special effects shift, the shift to post-production. If you take the departure point as Star Wars, that's had a big influence on editing because you basically have to incorporate the special effects in your story.
The kind of movies I make, 3D editing. I move everything around. I make all kinds of transitions and changes. So with this kind of technology and with a little previs department that will do computer animated videomatics and that sort of thing, I can just completely sort of rewrite as I'm editing. And I've always worked as my own writer, my own director, and my own editor. So when I sit down, I don't just cut a movie. I actually rewrite it, I redirect it. Now, using digital technology, you really are creating the reality in the editing room, and I'm sort of used to doing that, and I think that has carried through my entire career.
Editing is a series of graphic, rhythmic, spatial, and temporal choices and controls. And by making those choices from shot to shot and juxtapositions, you're affecting all those qualities. Editing was born to make movies. It only exists in movies. Therefore, it could be said, theoretically, that editing is filmmaking.
The Matrix pushed aesthetic pleasure very, very far. A combination of brilliant editing and new techniques. They used the effects, everything they could do at the most advanced level to create a very striking story and very, very striking imagery and situations.
When the Wachowski brothers use what they call bullet time, the lines between what's cinematography, what is editing, and what's computer-generated graphics have begun to really blur. What the effect is for the audience is that there is a new way of seeing time, seeing actors moving in time, and time can now be manipulated not just by slowing it down or speeding it up, but can actually be done by doing both at the same time.
Manipulating time, making it plastic, demonstrating that plasticity has been a concern of all 20th century art forms. Interestingly, film, I think, is inherently the one that's best suited to do that. What we did in the freeway chase is an example of that. We have something like 600 cuts in 15 minutes. The fact that I can do it so quickly makes me want to try it. In fact, I think to a certain extent the challenge is to realize when you shouldn't do something, simply because you can do it. Because movies are so handcrafted, it's very difficult to predict where technology is going to show up.
This is Zion Control.
But I think you can be pretty sure it'll show up as a positive thing.
Roger that, Control.
Editing has escaped the edges of cinema into our daily lives, and since we are constantly bombarded with information and images and choices, you have to edit in order to survive. And that starts earlier and earlier in terms of bombardment with information through television, through commercials, through the internet, through product placement in cinema, through billboards, magazines. So in principle, editing keeps us sane.